Hello everyone, Jim Boob here talking about Washington State and her vineyards. We did this presentation, I did this presentation for our tasting group a few weeks back and forgot to hit record, so I'm rebooting this and just wanted to get it down and official out of Zoom land and into the larger interwebs. So without further ado, we're going to talk about the great vineyards of Washington State. What kind of spawned this was a rereading of Paul Gregutt's great book, Washington Wines and Wineries. Oh, can we see that there? Maybe. There we are, Washington Wines and Wineries by Paul Gregutt. Excellent read. Probably the best book on the state of Washington and the Great Vineyard. So let's, without further ado, dive in and start taking a look. This is meant to be kind of a higher level sort of exploration of the single vineyards. We'll touch on some of the AVAs, sub-AVAs here, but really this is about the Great Vineyards specifically within the state of Washington. So Paul, in his book, goes into certain vineyards being Grand Crus, certain vineyards being Premier Cru. Obviously, this is all, unofficial, but as a man who spent a good majority of his professional life covering these, certainly worth knowing. And these are many of the great vineyards that you see on the labels in the state. So taking a look here, this is larger Yakima Valley AVA. Up here north of that, we have Rattlesnake Hills AVA, which is a sub-AVA. We'll take a little closer look there in a bit. Down here, this really small swale here, this is the Snipes Mountain AVA. We'll take a look. Up here is Wahluke Slope, just to orient ourselves. And up here is Naches Heights, kind of a small emerging AVA. But let's start here in Yakima and take a look at Red Willow Vineyard. So Red Willow is really one of the famous vineyards planted in the early 70s. This was one of the early kind of really exceptional vineyards in Yakima. Paul considers this to be a Premier Cru vineyard. So Mike Sauer is the owner here. He worked with Walter Clore, doing a lot of experimental plantings. Very dry vineyard and surrounded, as you can see here. This is really far west in the Yakima Valley AVA. It's cooler vineyard. Planted in the 70s, surrounded by the Yakima Indian Reservation. So Red Willow sells fruit to DeLille Sellers, Mark Ryan, Andrew Rich, Betts, as well as Owen Rowe. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of take a look here down. They have a very famous parcel here called Chapel Block, and Google Earth hasn't totally caught up with this. It's a really cool site, but thought I'd put Owen Rowe's label on here. So this is the Chapel Block portion of Red Willow Vineyard, as you can see here on the label, flattened out here. Unfortunately 2D. This is the chapel modeled after the chapel on the Hill of Hermitage in Hermitage in France. So pretty cool stuff. Killer Syrah coming off this block here as well. All right, since we're in the neighborhood, let's jump over to Naches Heights AVA. Not going to spend too much time here, but thought it was really kind of interesting, kind of emerging region here. This is the first AVA in Washington State to be fully sustainable. There's only 7 vineyards in the Naches Heights AVA, and all of them are either Bio-D, sustainable, or live certified, low impact viticulture and enology. It's hard to see from this aerial view, but as you kind of dip down here, you can see Naches Heights is really this sort of uplifted plateau here. So it's from 1,200 to 2,100 feet in elevation. It really is just kind of this like uplifted plateau in this western portion. Yeah, kind of really small emerging AVA, smallest planted so far. So let's go back to Yakima and look at Boushey. Boushey Vineyard. Dick Boushey, proprietor here, has 80 acres under vine. This larger kind of eastern Yakima, I think technically would qualify for Rattlesnake Hills. And planted in 1980. This is regarded as a Grand Cru vineyard, according to Paul, selling fruit to Betts and DeLille, McCrae, Long Shadows, Sparkman Cellars, and really best known for Rhone-style wines. I still remember some of the great bottlings. I don't even know if the label's still around. Unfortunately, McCrae, Boushey vineyards. Some of the first, my first exposure to Great Washington State wines were his bottlings out of this vineyard, and just like absolutely very Ronin style. Killer stuff. So definitely seek this out. This is a very, very cool vineyard, often picked as much as a month after Red Mountain. Okay, so let's take a look at Rattlesnake Hills AVA. So Rattlesnake Hills, sort of a controversial AVA. It was actually opposed by Dick Boushey. Falls in it. It's kind of northern extension here, this northern south-facing swale in Yakima. And, issue kind of was, from a branding standpoint, the question was, do people even know what Yakima is? And you could make the argument that even a lot of professionals don't really know how to sort of find Yakima on a Columbia Valley AVA map. So, what's the point of subdividing it, right? Well, as you can see here, it does, it is a bit of a different orientation than larger Yakima, but point remains. Anyway, here's Rattlesnake Hills AVA. So let's take a look at Snipes Mountain. This is a really cool, small AVA here. So Rattlesnake Hills, you see this kind of much larger swale. Snipes Mountain is quite small, and Snipes Mountain extends from the town here of Granger, small little town of Granger, east over to Sunnyside. And as you can see, as we dip down here, Snipes Mountain. See the word mountain used kind of loosely in the AVAs of Washington, which is kind of ironic considering they're surrounded by very serious mountain ranges here. So Snipes Mountain is this sort of hillside that extends up and is both sort of north and south facing. As we trace our way east here, elevation really only getting up to about 1,200 feet max, but many of the vineyards here are lower than that, 800-900 feet. As we trace east, we get to the sunny town of Sunnyside. So this is Sunnyside, and right here is Harrison Hill Vineyard. So very famous vineyard, bottled by DeLille Cellars. This is the second oldest vineyard in the state of Washington. And as you can see, kind of like an Oprion situation here, where you have the vineyard itself being essentially surrounded by the encroaching suburbs. So pretty cool stuff. Very important vineyard to know. All right, so let's look at DeBrule Vineyard, another vineyard within Rattlesnake Hills AVA, and pretty killer stuff. So DeBrule, essentially a 1,300-foot basalt promontory, south-facing, and planted largely to Bordeaux varieties in the 90s. 92 to 97, the vineyard was planted, and has some early Riesling vines. They date back to the 1980s that were there when they bought the property, and they kept, and I think that fruit still goes to Woodward Canyon, if I'm not mistaken. So these guys own the Cote Bonneville label. Killer stuff. Really expensive wine, but really, really good. And some fruit here goes to Owen Rowe, Tamarack Cellars, Seven Hills, as well as Woodward Canyon. All right, so let's head to the Gorge. So Celilo Vineyard, this is another Grand Cru vineyard. We're heading way southwest here to the Columbia Gorge AVA here. So this is the very dramatic Celilo Vineyard. For those of you who've been to Washington and have done the drive from eastern Washington State to Oregon, you drive on this road here, and this vineyard is just one of the more striking things in the landscape. As you head east, you see essentially just really kind of like towns, barren land. See if the computer can catch up here. You know, and it just erupts out of the landscape into view, and really, really beautiful vineyard. So, Celilo, 70 acres, again, Grand Cru vineyard. This was planted in 1972 and planted on an extinct volcano, as you can see right here, up here. You have dry, cool air coming from the east. This is kind of a cooler climate vineyard. It's actually a subalpine climate. Dry farmed, super well drained, as you can see everything here just emptying into the river. And really killer white grape varieties here. So Woodward Canyon gets some old vine Chardonnay from here. There's amazing old vine Gewürztraminer that's been bottled by a few different wineries throughout the years. Sinan, Ken Wright, bottling out of the great Celilo vineyard. So killer stuff. We could do a whole thing just on Columbia Gorge, but I wanted to single that out. So let's head east to the Horse Heaven Hills, AVA, and to Champoux Vineyard. All right. So Champoux, absolutely Grand Cru in every way. This is one of the most historic and important vineyards in the entire state. This was initially called Mercer Ranch, again planted in 1972 along with Celilo, and is some of the oldest Cabernet in the state here in Block 1. As you can see here, these circular crops, you see a lot of this in Washington. These are central posts for irrigation that essentially is on wheels and just will traverse the exterior here. You know, if you're planting corn and carrots and potato, which a lot of the surrounding land is and was presently, this is how you would irrigate and farm this land. So the original Champoux vineyard here really started out as just Block 1 in 72. Paul Champoux, who was running the property at the time, had this small little block that was not covered by the irrigation, and figured, hey, I like Cabernet, let's plant some Cabernet there. And lo and behold, this little pocket ended up becoming one of the most important blocks of Cabernet in the state. So here, presently, Champoux Vineyard's owned by a partnership, Quilceda Creek, Woodward Canyon, Andrew Will, Paul Champoux, and the winery, Mercer Ranch Winery, ended up going under, but the vineyard ended up becoming very, very famous. You can't really see this here. Champoux Vineyard is kind of an undulating, very large vineyard, rather large vineyard, and isn't uniformly Grand Cru, but certain parts of it absolutely are. So very important to know here, Champoux Vineyard. So let's head south to Alder Ridge. So Alder Ridge Vineyard, south of Champoux, is designated a Premier Cru vineyard and is one of the state's largest at 800 acres. So very large vineyard, planted in 97. As you can see here, a lot of different aspects and orientations in this vineyard. I'm going to back up just a little bit here. You can see we're right on the river. So this is known for Rhone varieties, but Cabernet as well, and you get that cooling influence of the river and the winds kind of sweeping through, giving you very thick skins in Alder Ridge. Sandy, low vigor soils, anywhere from 300 to 1,000 feet in elevation. It's a relatively warm site, but it's picked late due to the cooling winds and the big diurnal swings. So Andrew Rich, Long Shadows, LaColle, Syncline, and Betts all sourcing from Alder Ridge. All right, so let's head east. Wahluke, oops, no, let's not go there. Let's go to one other place first. That's Wahluke Slope, we'll get back there. Wallula, that's what I want. So we're essentially heading east on the river here to Wallula Vineyard slash The Benches, one of the most gorgeous vineyards I've ever had the privilege of visiting. It's Google Earth is a pretty powerful tool, but this really doesn't do it justice. This is super breathtaking vineyard, as you can get up here. So The Benches essentially looks like a golf course, right? Planted in 1997 by Andy Denhode. This is right on the Wallula Gap. So let me back up a little bit here. Wallula Gap, as you can see here, this was one of the major push points of the Missoula floods. And as these floodwaters were rushing through here, you can see, once it renders, just the scarring that comes through here of the multiple floods as it rushed through the Wallula Gap, just scouring this ancient volcanic basalt soil. So Wallula, as you head here, down here, some of these lower vineyards is largely basalt that's just been scoured away by the floodwaters, and then up here is essentially wind-blown loess. It's a biodynamic vineyard. It's where Pacific Rim gets their biodynamic Riesling from. And this was purchased by Alan Shoup for the Long Shadows project in 2008. Rumored to be the highest price paid for Washington State vineyard land at the time. So Wallula, The Benches. Go visit. It's beautiful. All right. Sagemoor Vineyards. So Sagemoor is an interesting one. For the sake of brevity, this is already going to be kind of a longer talk, but you got to trim it somewhere, right? So Sagemoor is a group of vineyards, but it's also its own vineyard. So Sagemoor Vineyards as a group encompasses both Sagemoor Vineyard, which we see here, as well as Dionysus, Bacchus, and Weinbau, which you've probably seen on labels as well. So as both this vineyard as well as a overarching umbrella vineyard, and those vineyards lie just a bit north of Sagemoor here. So Sagemoor, 900 acres all in, and very, very large vineyard here, and is really one of the great sources for old vine plantings. This was purchased in 1968 and planted in 72, 73, as you can see here, along with Celilo and the block one of Champoux. So some very old vine Cabernet here. It goes to Woodward Canyon, La Colle, and Leonetti. And this was a vineyard, from what I understand, it didn't have the greatest vineyard management for the totality of its existence, but this gentleman named Kent Walliser picked it up in 2002 as a manager and really turned things around, and the vineyard has been onward and upward since. So fruit here going to some of the best of the best: Abeja, Boudreaux, Cellars, Janik, Long Shadows, Woodward Canyon, DeLille. I mean, a lot of the very, very top Bordeaux great producers in this area. All right, so from Sagemoor, let's go to Red Mountain. So Red Mountain AVA. Here again, mountain loosely defined, and this is the totality of the AVA. A very small AVA, very warm site. And we have everything extending here, looks like from 586 feet, if you look in the lower right-hand corner of your screen here, 586 feet, up to about 900, almost 1,000 feet here up at Col Solare. So let's take a look at Ciel du Cheval, Grand Ciel. So looking at Ciel du Cheval, this is a absolutely Grand Cru vineyard here. This kind of like slightly J-shaped parcel here. This was planted and purchased in 1975 by Jim Holmes and John Williams, partners in the Kiona label. Kiona ended up becoming this Heart of the Hill vineyard here as Kiona. And sandy loam soils, it's an ancient riverbed calcareous soil. And in 94, the partners split with Williams taking the Kiona label and parcel of the vineyard, and Jim Holmes keeping Ciel du Cheval. And you know, this is an analogy you hear a lot and seems to hold true. You know, in Burgundy, kind of mid-slope is where you see the great stuff. And man, this is smack dab right in the center of the AVA, huh? Right here, Ciel du Cheval, heart of the hill. And then to the left here we have Delille's Grand Ciel and Klipsun, which I believe is actually misspelled on this map, which is kind of funny. But Klipsun going to Quilceda Creek, obviously. But back to Ciel du Cheval, these are Bordeaux varieties that are both powerful and refined. This is super hollowed ground for very important Cabernet Sauvignon. And in Merlot, really high pH soils that give tiny berries. Apparently they're just a hair over half the size of your average Napa Valley berry. So wild stuff. So from here, we're going to just go a little bit west to Klipsun. Again, another Grand Cru vineyard here, Red Mountain being very important for Bordeaux variety production. Recent acquisition by the Terlato Wine Group, Chicago represent, picking up the great Klipsun vineyard. This is on the west side of Red Mountain here, so really windy site that gives you thick skins. Interestingly enough, this is originally planted to 2/3 white wine when it came out. Now it's 85% red. So Klipsun was founded and planted about 10 years after Ciel du Cheval. And Klipsun is really known for just huge structured Bordeaux wines. These are just massive powerhouse styles of Bordeaux variety. And allegedly they are the most expensive grapes to be purchased and sourced in the state of Washington, at least at the time of publication of Paul's book. All right, so that's a little quick look at Red Mountain. One other, Col Solare, very famous up here as well, Force Majeure as well. So let's go to Cold Creek Vineyard. So Cold Creek is the first vineyard designated Cabernet in the state of Washington, owned by Chateau Saint Michel. And this is a Premier Cru vineyard. It's 900 acres, 850 planted, so very large, very remote. We just do a little bit of this. We tilt this up a little bit. We orient ourselves. So this is just south of the Wahluke Slope AVA here, which we'll get to. But as you can see here, Cold Creek, very remote. For those of you who have driven through Columbia Valley, you see these things every now and again, right? Like you're driving down this street and it's just completely barren and arid, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, boom, huge vineyard, green, verdant. And this has to do with water rights. So on the other side of this road here, this area is clearly doesn't have water rights, or if it does, it's not being utilized. So your ability to really do viticulture in this part of the world depends on your ability to get water there. So very important. Cold Creek is one of the warmest sites in the state, but it also has really great air drainage. So typically when there's major frost issues, which Washington gets a lot of, Cold Creek ironically tends not to have those. So they had a full crop in the 2004 freeze year, which was highly irregular. And in 73, the plantings date back to 1973 here as well. So very, very old vines, Cab, Merlot, Chardonnay, Riesling. And tends to show vintage variation. So rather large vineyard and really great values. I think this is really kind of one of those vineyards that is often looked past because Saint Michel is often associated with much larger production, and well, Cold Creek is pretty darn killer stuff. So let's take a look at Wahluke. So Wahluke Slope AVA here. So when the Missoula floods were coming through, Wahluke Slope essentially was an eddy. So the soils and the floodwaters that were coming down from the north were sort of swirling around and collecting and became this sort of south-facing warm slope here, which is Wahluke. And when you talk about Wahluke slope, you have to talk about the Milbrandt family. So Butch and Jerry Milbrandt, really great growers, own some of the best vineyards in this area and are one of the largest private growers, if not the largest private grower in Washington. So they own 13 different large sites and growing, over 1,600 acres under vine. They own the Evergreen Vineyard in Ancient Lakes, which we'll take a look at in a bit, where we have our Kung Fu Girl, Milbrandt Riesling, big source of Riesling coming from there. And Katherine Leone Vineyard, Clifton Hills, a lot of these vineyards supplying K Vintners, Charles Smith as well. And Paul Gregutt recognizes Milbrandt as a grower as being kind of premier cru vineyards, which sort of bends the rules a little bit because they own a lot of different land, but darn good farmers. Okay, so north of Wahluke Slope, we have the Royal Slope, Frenchman Hills. We're not going to delve too much into this, but this is kind of an emerging region. Royal Slope, Royal City, this is where you have Charles Smith making, some of his great, highly concentrated, 3-digit scoring Syrahs out of this area. And Ancient Lakes just north of that, much cooler region here, mostly white grape varieties here planted, and cool stuff. On to Connor Lee Vineyard. So Connor Lee is really great kind of sandy vineyard, recognized as a premier cru vineyard, known for Chardonnay and Bordeaux varieties. A lot of great Chardonnay. This is recognized as one of the top Chardonnay sites in the state. And it's kind of a cooler site in a warmer part of town. This vineyard sells to Abeja, Bookwalter. Probably the most famous is Beauty, B-U-T-Y. Does a Connor Lee Vineyard Designate, Gorman, and Long Shadows. And this is just kind of east of the Wahluke Slope. Pepper Bridge. All right, another premier cru vineyard, and we are in Walla Walla AVA. So really until recently, a lot of the top Walla Walla estates that were based in Walla Walla were really not sourcing fruit from Walla Walla. So Pepper Bridge was one of the early vineyards established in the Walla Walla AVA. It was really Pepper Bridge and Seven Hills were really the large important plantings in Walla Walla for quite a while. It was acquired in 1988 as a wheat field, and first 5 acres were planted to Cab and Merlot in 1991. So there were only 40 acres planted in Walla Walla at the time. Again, most producers were sourcing outside of the AVA into the larger Columbia Valley AVA to make their wine. So looking specifically at Woodward Canyon, Leonetti, and LaCole 41, signing on early initial producers sourcing from Pepper Bridge. 160 acres currently, very good vineyard, also can be unfortunately pretty frost prone as well. Rocks of Milton Freewater, excuse me. Heading south here, as you can see, we are now in Oregon, state line right here. Walla Walla, of course, overlaps both states here. We have the Rocks of Milton Freewater AVA. Have to mention Cayuse when we mention the Rocks of Milton Freewater. I did my best trying to find any way to find out where these vineyards are within the AVA, and I couldn't find any. So I've been to the vineyards. It's been a very long time, but if any of y'all know where those are at, would love to add them to the map here. So Cayuse, Ancerise, and Chamberlain, all super famous vineyards that I wish I could point out. Here we are, Rocks of Milton Freewater. I want to keep saying Freewater. Anyway, figure it's important to take a look at Leonetti, one of the great ancient estates, one of the early estates in Walla Walla AVA. So first producer in the Walla Walla AVA. This is the OG planting here on the estate. Obviously, they're sourcing from other parts of Walla Walla and beyond at this point, but that's where it all started. All right, let's take a look at Sevein vineyards. So Sevein vineyards, really wild development here. 2,700 acres all in. Wow, right? So kind of the anchor vineyard here is the Seven Hills vineyard. So the Seven Hills vineyard is 170 acres of vines sown by a group of partners, Leonetti, Lacole 41, and Pepperbridge Winery here as well. And these guys, Seven Hills, sells to a good number of producers as well. So beyond Seven Hills, they also will farm these estate vineyards, which are the Sevein vineyards. So these are estate vineyards, Lacole 41's Ferguson, Doubleback Bob Healy, Cataretta Southwind. These are all owned by their respective wineries. Leonetti, Cellar, Sarah Pedace. Okay. These are owned by the different estates, but farmed by the Sevein Management Company. So you can own the vineyard and either farm it yourself or have the partners here at Sevein, Seven Hills farm it for you. But large, important, very diverse. I mean, if you back out, I mean, it's about as large as the Rocks and Milton Freewater district on its own as a vineyard development. So let's take a look at a couple more. All right, Lake Collines Vineyard. So Lake Collines Vineyard is one of my favorite Syrah vineyards in the state. Gramercy Cellars, if you haven't had the pleasure of enjoying these wines, you really should be enjoying these wines. These are some of the more compelling Rhone varieties coming out of the United States, and really one of my favorite wineries in the world. Killer stuff, but their Lake Collines bottling is just lights out, beautiful, and super pretty. Important to kind of contextualize this here. This is a very cool eastern oriented vineyard that's approaching the Blues Mountains here. This is the Blues, and a lot of new plantings here are going up in the foothills and heading into elevation in this part of town. So really kind of the future here obviously is everything warms up, finding elevation and cooler pockets to grow, certainly Syrah, but other grape varieties as well is becoming increasingly important in this part of town. All right, and Woodward Canyon Estate, second winery bonded in Walla Walla after Leonetti. Just an unbelievably beautiful property and some of the sweetest people you could ever hope to meet. And here is the estate. So a lot of old vine Chardonnay and Merlot. You can see down here some parcels that were removed due to just chronic freezing out. But that is Woodward Canyon Estate, and that is all I have right now. I hope this was helpful to everyone. Any questions? I'm sure I left some things out, but it was really fun to put this together, and I hope you all enjoyed.